My hometown is Walnut Grove, Minnesota, where Laura Ingalls Wilder lived. So I grew up very close to Plum Creek and have waded in it many, many times. My mother had been a teacher before she married my dad, who was a farmer, and she loved to read, and my dad loved to read too. But we had no library in town and no bookmobile either. There was a country school down the road between our place and my uncle's place that had been closed heaven knows how long ago, and it had a whole supply of books from the late 1800s in it, and we went down there and took lots of books out of there. And then my mom asked the librarian in the next town, or somebody in Tracy, the next town, if we could use that library, and we got permission to go to that library. And that probably made me who I am today, was going to that library and realizing there were books for me. The librarian was there to guard the books, however, and one time she did not let me check out a book that had not been checked out since 1932 because it was too valuable to leave Tracy. But I found there the books that became the love of my life, and those are the Betsy Tacy books by Maud Hart Lovelace. And I read them over and over again, and my favorites were the high school books like this one, Betsy in Spite of Herself. And I never did get to read them all the way through until I was in another town, in another place, because Betsy Tacy, the first book, was not owned by the Tracy Library, and I never really knew what happened at the beginning of the story. Well, I also had a high school librarian, Walter Mann, who was, he taught speech, and he was also the school librarian for the high school, the grade school. Walnut Grove is not that big a town. And he really influenced me. He advised me on what to read. He would taught the Latin class when in the late 1950s, the state of Minnesota said every school had to teach a foreign language, and Walnut Grove only had one teacher who knew a foreign language, and that was Latin. So the only foreign language I ever took in Walnut Grove was Latin, 2 years of Latin. We did that. But he influenced my reading, and he would even loan me books of his and music of his to listen to. And I've always felt what a profound influence he was on my life. I went to St. Paul to the College of St. Catherine, and I decided I wanted to major in library science and do what he had shown me to do. And a friend of mine who was with me today, she and I were recruited by the Queensboro Public Library in New York City, and they wanted us to come and work in New York City, and we thought that sounded like a really good idea. She's from Iowa, I'm from Minnesota, and we decided to head for New York. And we also decided we wouldn't go for more than 2 years. And we followed that. We lived and worked in New York. We went to shows. We read lots of books. We learned all sorts of different ways that people live from the ways that we live in small town in Minnesota. Gretchen got married while we were in New York, and I came back to Minnesota at the end of our 2 years. We were both back. She was in Texas. I was in Minnesota, and I went on to get my master's degree at the University of Minnesota. Then I went job hunting, and things were different then. You could easily get a job. Everywhere you applied, you got offered a job. And I decided to go to Anoka County because Hennepin County offered me a job, but at that time they wouldn't let librarians with a master's degree do children's work. And that's what I wanted to do. And I went to Anoka County, and I became a children's librarian, and I found I absolutely loved being a children's librarian. I love doing story time. I love going to schools and talking to kids about why they should read, good books to read, coming to the library, etc., etc. And I was in that job for a long time. I became the head of children's services, and then I became head of children's services and main librarian at the main library, the supervisor of the people in that library, which was not nearly as much fun as working with children. And part of my job was to go to schools a lot and talk to kids about books and reading and coming to the library. And this was really fun, and I'd often be called in. They'd ask me to read stories to the kids, talk about books to the kids, bring good new books to the library. And I really had fun doing this, and I started thinking about things a lot, what kids really liked. And I would do Title I programs. That was something that I barely knew about before I started working in libraries. But kids who weren't doing as well in school as they hoped they would be able to do. They'd have evening programs for the parents and families of those children. And they want somebody to come in and entertain everybody, the adults, the teenagers, the kids who were in the classes, and their preschool brothers and sisters. And I found that I was able to do that even in a gymnasium when everybody was sitting on a wood floor. And I started getting hired to do this at libraries that were not in Anoka County. And I was traveling all around the metro area doing programs and picking up some extra income. And I was just kind of amazed that this was going to happen. I started getting asked to speak at state conferences. I was doing that quite a lot. And then suddenly I met a publisher. I'd been working at the library for a long time, and I met a new publisher from Mankato. There was a company starting up called Capstone Press. Well, the reason I met this particular publisher was because my lifelong love of the Betsy Tacy books, he'd heard about it and he wanted to talk to me. He was from Mankato. His name is John Coughlin, and he was very interested in the Betsy Tacy books and promoting Mankato through them. And Susan Allen Toth had told him they were beautifully written and he had to read them. He always thought that Maud Hart Lovelace couldn't have been a very good writer because she was from Mankato, and not that many great writers came out of there. Well, I knew people in Walnut Grove who had the same opinion about Laura Ingalls Wilder, so we understood that point of view, that if she's from my hometown, she can't be that good. Well, it was going to be her 100th birthday, and we decided we would have a 100th birthday party for Maud Hart Lovelace, and we got Borders in Calhoun Square, long since gone, but on April 25th, 1982, it was booming, it was thriving, and we got articles in the Minneapolis paper, in the St. Paul Pioneer Press, we got articles in Minnesota Monthly. And we found that the day we had that party, and we'd ordered birthday cake for 300 people, but 500 people showed up that day. And I met people who were their children or grandchildren or themselves were actually characters in the book. And just the whole thing, we had a group going. The Betsy Tacy Society had started in Mankato. We had our own Twin Cities Society, and we worked together with Mankato. And I just wanted to I wanted people to read the Betsy Tacy books because I'm not the only one, and that is the motto of Betsy Tacy fans. I thought I was the only one, and we aren't the only one. They're all over the country. We know that people like Nora Ephron was a big fan. People like Anna Quindlen rode around in my car when she came for free to talk about her love for Maud Hart Lovelace. Laura Lippman is a big fan. Newbery Medal winners. You would not believe some of the people who are big fans. Roz Chast from the New Yorker magazine is a big Betsy Tacy fan. And several years ago, the travel editor of the Washington Post was a big Betsy Tacy fan, and I was out in D.C., and she and I went out to lunch, and I went to the Washington Post to meet her. And I was in her office, and she was on the phone or something, and this man walked through and said hi, and I said hi right back. And when she got off the phone, she said, "Do you know who that was?" And I said, "No," and she said, "That was Bob Woodward." And I thought, good grief, I said hello to Bob Woodward, and he said hi to me because I'm a Betsy Tacy fan. I wouldn't have been here for any other reason. Well, this just kind of took off, and we've just devoted a lot of time and energy to trying to make more and more people fall in love as we did with Betsy Tacy and Tip. We've had multiple conventions, and we've gone to Mankato, scoped out where they lived. And when I was in college, my best friend and I and two other girls went down to Mankato, and we went to the houses where the characters in the books had actually lived. And the next year we went back. And that year we did something that people have asked me if they can touch me, because I did it. And that is, we went to the high school house that Maud Hart Lovelace lived in from 1902 to 1906 when she was in high school in Mankato. And she loved that house. And it was sort of a dream house that you wished you could live in. And when we got to the door, the second year we went, there was a sign on the door. It belonged to Mankato State University. And the sign on the door said, "Come right in." Well, we went right in and there was nobody in there. So we walked all through it. We took photographs of it. And we couldn't believe we'd gotten in that high school house. It was like being, in my opinion, like being in Buckingham Palace or a fairy castle or something. It was a place that I'd always wanted to be in. And then we left to go to New York City a few weeks later when we graduated from college. And my aunt lived in Waseca and subscribed to the Mankato Free Press. And a few weeks after we were in the house, she sent me the article from the Mankato Free Press that Betsy's high school house had been torn down to make a parking lot for the courthouse. It is no more. In fact, I've never met anybody other than the people who were with me that day who have ever been in the high school house. So people ask if they can touch me because I was in that house. And it was a big house. It was a nice house. And my husband was working with an ex-prisoner. He was mentoring him. And we went to take him out to lunch one day. And it was someplace in North Minneapolis. And I walked into that house and I thought, it is the high school house. It had the same floor plan. And that was quite a thrill to realize that there was another house. But people get so excited. So this year I decided a Mankato publisher asked me to write a book about my experiences, because I think my experiences with the Betsy Tacy books were really unique. I wrote to Maud Hart Lovelace as a child, and as she did to everybody, she sent me a very nice postcard in green ink, which was Betsy's signature color, with pictures from the characters in the books in it, and I treasured it. But after our trip to Mankato and meeting some of the characters, I wrote her a longer letter, and she wrote back, and I wrote back, and she wrote back. I got a letter from Tacy saying she wished that she could have played with girls like us. When she was kids, they would have played with us. And I just got all sorts of information. Later on, I went to meet more characters in the book. But I had all of the letters. I saved all the letters I got from Maud Hart Lovelace. And in New York City, a little girl, I would work on getting little girls to read the Betsy Tacy book. And I'd written away when I was a kid for a booklet that the publisher was giving away about Maud Hart Lovelace. And I treasured that little booklet. And I told little kids, you can write away for that booklet. And one little girl came to the library and she had that booklet that she'd written away for. And it didn't have the same picture on the cover that mine had. It had something different. But I started looking through it. And it told how Maud Hart Lovelace had gotten a letter about these 4 college girls that went to Mankato and saw the places in her books. And she saved all of their letters, and there was a whole page about our trip to Mankato. Maud Hart Lovelace is my idol, and I just couldn't believe that she'd saved this. And it turned out that she had saved them, because as years went by and her daughter died, one day I opened the mail. I had a package from Maud's daughter, and I'd met her, but I didn't really know her. And in that package were all the letters I'd written to Maud Hart Lovelace, which her mother had saved. And so here were my letters come back to me. Later I got letters that the people whose houses we visited that summer when we met some of the characters, the letters that they had written to Maud about our visit. So we have this incredible archive of really great information for Betsy Tacy fans. Plus, we have, lots of photographs and everything. So I just think that my experience with Maud Hart Lovelace has been incredibly unique, and it's really special. And for people who never got anywhere near the high school house, which is most of us. And by the way, one of the people who came that day was to the birthday party was Louise King. There's a picture of her with me in the book. And she became a very good friend. And she was the daughter of Carney's house party. So everything about this book was absolutely wonderful to me. And just a story of something unusual that happened in my life. I also want to say we did a Betsy Tacy songbook, because they're always singing in this book, in the books. And what we did was we found old sheet music I had some. I'd been looking for it for years, but then the miracle of eBay happened and it wasn't impossible to find anymore. And it just was, it's a great thing. We couldn't afford to print all the covers in color inside the book, but we did on the back cover. This is a song I always wondered, how does this song go? And now I know. But on the back of the book, we did the covers thumbnail size so you could see them in color. Now, I'm mad for Betsy Tacy, but my life took a completely different direction when I was working at the library. Like I say, I started getting hired to do talks outside of the library from other libraries. The Coughlin companies in Mankato, they wanted me to speak at conferences because due to a fluky thing, I'd written an article for a library magazine called School Library Journal. It was the library magazine with the highest circulation in the world. I wrote an article about, somebody had written a review of a book. It was about a little girl who was a fundamentalist girl, and the review trashed it, basically, and I thought the only reason they trashed it was the girl was fundamentalist. And I asked the question, why can you be Catholic or Lutheran or Jewish, but you can't be fundamentalist? It's not acceptable, and we can't do that this way. Well, I got a lot of positive feedback from that letter. And then a couple of years later, I wrote another article about why don't we use more nonfiction in the classroom. And because I found that boys particularly really like nonfiction. And I really started thinking about what topics will get boys all excited. And I realized that you cannot do better than poop. It just is the number one thing that boys get really excited about. But there are a lot of things. There are unusual animals, animals of any sort, anything gross, anything. It was really fun to do that and go into a classroom and have this happen over and over again. The boys say, you can't take that book back. We need it here. We need it here. And kids were coming in and asking for those books, and I thought this would be fun. And I wrote an article for the same magazine about books that boys would like. And much to my astonishment, they asked me to write a column. And I'd never wanted to write anything regularly, but I thought my name would be in there all the time. So I wrote a column on a nonfiction for kids for over 17 years. And I quit it. I'd been kind of getting tired, ready to move on, or just stop having that hanging over my head all the time. And I fell on a curb in New York City and landed in the middle of the 43rd and Broadway, and I'd broken my hip and femur, and I quit the column from my hospital bed. But long before I did that, a library publisher was asking me to write books, and about children's books, and I've got a couple of those right here. I ended up writing 7 books. This is like, get those guys reading. Here's one, Gotcha for Guys, nonfiction books to get kids excited about reading. This is fiction books for kids. And the miracle of my life will be that there's the best thing you can get in the library world, books, is a starred review. And Booklist is the magazine of the American Library Association. And this book got a starred review, and the first sentence was, sometimes a book comes along that's so good you wonder how you did your job without it. And I thought, I can die and go to heaven now. You know, I got a starred review. I can't believe it. It was a librarian in Anchorage, and I thanked her. Boy, did I thank her for that review. But I did 7 books like this, and that was never my goal. I never had any desire to write. But I also, as a consequence of this and everything else, I ended up with a speaking career in which I have given talks, multiple talks, in 46 states and 7 in Canada. And I mean, I've been touring Cancun, and I just have had a blast with books. And my life has been a lot about books, about as much about books as anything else. But I've had a really fun time with books, and I haven't stopped loving books. And one thing is that I've had to read so much nonfiction for kids. And boy, a lot of it is absolutely spectacular stuff. And lots of times I'll pick up a book that's got such good reviews, I have to read it. And I think, oh, I'm not interested in this. But the minute I start reading it, I get interested. And one of my friends said, you know more about all this weird stuff than anybody I know. We'll be with another friend and she'll bring up a subject and say, did you know blah, blah. And then she said, you'll take over and you know so much more about it than she does. Because I've had to read all this nonfiction. It's been an absolute miracle. And right now, like Houghton Mifflin has a lovely series for about 5th through 8th graders. It's called Scientists in the Field. And they take different scientists, lots of wonderful color photographs, excellent, beautifully written books. Most of them get starred reviews. And my husband is reading all of those right now. And he's just, this is the most wonderful book. I hear it all the time. And I cannot recommend them highly enough for people who are interested in things. But I'm always picking a book that doesn't look good and starting reading it and find out this is great stuff and how come I didn't know more about this. As a result, I am a maniac about recycling. I just can't stand the way we all throw everything away. I go to the organic center regularly. I try to do everything I can for the environment. I just can't believe how abusive people are. But that comes from reading. It rots the minds, that's what they say. So, that's kind of who I am and where I come from. Part of who I am and where I come from.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I know the area where you grew up pretty well. I have cousins in Tracy, including a kind of Tracy guru who just died a few years ago, Chuck Reinert. And I know Walnut Grove. I go there once a year and sometimes take tours to the Laura Ingalls Wilder stuff. Pilgrimages, I think you'd call it in Catholic terms, because that's how they regard that stuff. Can you say anything? I mean, you've launched a splendid career. What's special, do you think, about growing up in that kind of place, a little place where books are precious and few and far between, and the only foreign language anybody can scare up is Latin in case you happen to get caught in a black hole and taken back to the time of Julius Caesar, you'll be okay, or one of those little villages in Switzerland where they still speak it. So what's sort of, what has it done for you to be from a little place?
Well, I kind of like being from a little place. I really especially am proud of the fact that I'm from Walnut Grove because it knocks people, oh my God, you're from Walnut Grove. It feels really good. And I think, I feel I was really lucky to have the parents that I had. And I have one sibling, and he's a retired 2-star general, And my cousin, who was on the farm a quarter of a mile down the road, he flew Nixon to China, okay? So I think we did okay, And I feel like I learned a lot of good things I think there's things in small towns that are just absolutely lovely. And people tend to look down on them, but I still have a friend from Walnut Grove, and her husband was in the military, and we didn't see each other for years at a time, but we send regular emails that say, I need to talk, and then, we'll usually talk for an hour and a half or so. I loved her parents, she loved my parents. I didn't feel deprived in any way. I knew it was a very small town, but everybody around us was a very small town. And we cared passionately about things. We were proud of Walnut Grove. Walnut Grove was very good at basketball. We won the district tournament 7 years out of 9, and we were all basketball crazy. And I like that kind of background to us. And when we have class reunions, the older we get, the closer we are to each other, because we knew each other very well, and we knew what our families were like. We knew what church you went to, and there were 3 Lutheran churches in the Walnut Grove vicinity, 1 Methodist and 1 Catholic. So it wasn't like a real lot of religious diversity or anything like that. There were no people who were not white people. You didn't have that diversity. And boy, I got some of that when I went to New York City. But I felt like it's a great place to be in many ways, even though your education may be somewhat lacking. One of my mom's best friends lived in another small town real close to the South Dakota border, and he went to Carleton, and we went out for lunch a few years ago, and he said, I just was no way prepared for Carleton. And I know when I got to science at St. Kate's, I could not light a Bunsen burner because our chemistry teacher thought it was too dangerous for us to learn how to. But I didn't feel really deprived. I just felt when I went to college, I didn't know anybody, and I felt that was really hard, not to know anybody at all. And lots of the people who went there had friends who were going there too. And man, one person who was quite a bit older than I am had gone to St. Kate's for 1 year, but that was the only other person. I had no frame of reference. So it was hard in some ways to be from such a small town. And then, of course, when the TV show came on, all of a sudden it was a big deal to be from that tiny little town. But I think there are many, many good things. Knowing people is really good. When I see people at my class reunion, I can ask about, how's your brother so-and-so, how's your sister so-and-so. I think it was a good place to grow up. And I like it. Plum Creek was very close to our farm. It was right on the edge of our farm down, and we had really good friends. My parents had wonderful friends, and I had wonderful friends, and I'm still close to some of them. I think it's a great place to grow up. But, there's a brand new book out that I just got from Amazon. I've got it here. It's called Laura Ingalls Ruined My Life. Have you heard of that? And it's fiction. It's by somebody from Hudson, Wisconsin, and I hope that she changes her attitude to Walnut Grove real quick, because, someplace along, I suspect it's going to happen, that the heroine is going to fall in love with the town, but she's got some things right, but a lot of things, I just feel like it's the outsider looking at this place and thinking how isolated and insular they are, and I don't think it's that way so much anymore. Walnut Grove has tried its darndest, and somebody told me there's no gas station between Mankato and Walnut Grove. I said, what? It's 85 miles. U.S. Highway 14 all the way. There are gas stations in Springfield, New Ulm, Sleepy Eye. There's gas stations in Lamberton and Revere. And she said, we took county roads. Excuse me, this person is from Kansas originally, and I think gas stations aren't on county roads in rural areas. They're on U.S. highways. And Mankato to Walnut Grove is U.S. highway all the way. And I think you get this attitude that somehow, it's this little dinky place. But there's a lot of intelligent people in that little dinky place. And the man who provided me with books and music that I would not have known about, very intelligent. On the other hand, some of our teachers were probably not so good. My history professor in 11th grade asked the class, does anybody know what the name of Queen Elizabeth I's cousin was, who became queen next? What was her nickname? And I raised my hand and I said, Bloody Mary. And he led the class in a wild chorus of laughter. And I looked at him, he said it was Mary, Queen of Scots. I said, she wasn't Elizabeth's sister. She was her cousin. She wasn't even her first cousin. He was sure he was right, but he looked it up, and of course he was wrong. And you think, would this have happened in another school? Maybe. He was the coach. I don't know. I wonder how much history he actually had. But, I'd read it by that point. I knew, and I feel like reading is the way to everything. It's the road to everything.
The mystique of Laura Ingalls Wilder has extended to the Hmong. The Hmong clan that settled in Walnut Grove. I got to interview him, and I asked him, why Walnut Grove? He said, well, we could live in any number of small communities around here. They work a lot of them in agricultural processing stuff, but this is Laura Ingalls Wilder's place. This is where we want to be. So the mystique crosses cultural boundaries pretty neatly. Now, I understand viscerally the attachment of the Laura Ingalls Wilder books, because they were the read-aloud books.
Uh-huh.
In my little country school, in Forest City, Minnesota. So I know that kind of loyalty. Somehow I've missed Betsy Tacy. I've missed Maud Hart Lovelace. So can you give a short sermon about why this thing is so wonderful and why we should all get infected with this virus of the Betsy Tacy books?
Well, the interesting thing to me is all of the people who are infected with it. And, I think one thing that really helped us out, a lot of us had this mad passion. And my friend Gretchen Ronka, who was here today and maybe here today still, she loved them when she was growing up. I know many people who loved them when they were growing up, as I do. I think, first of all, that Betsy's family, which was based incredibly autobiographically on Maud Hart Lovelace's family. She had an older sister and a younger sister. She had very functional parents. They were the kind of parents that everybody would dream of having. And there's a scene in Betsy it's Heaven to Betsy. No, wait, I'm sorry, yeah, Heaven to Betsy. Betsy is in 9th grade. Her older sister, Julia, who's much more beautiful and has a beautiful singing voice. Well, Julia's been singing in the Episcopalian choir because they have a good choir and she likes the music, not going to the Baptist church. And Betsy starts singing in the Episcopalian choir as well. And they have a long discussion and they both want to become Episcopalians. Now, their father is a shoe salesman. And he's a very devoted Baptist. And they go and they tell him they want to become Episcopalians. And he tells them about his mother, their grandmother, who went in this small community in Iowa and collected the money so that they could build, I believe it's a Baptist church out on the prairie. And this is very important. But he says it's very important that you choose the religion that is right for you. And as long as you support that church and are active in that church, I don't see any reason why you cannot belong to that church. And he says it much more, Maud Hart Lovelace says it much more beautifully than I do. But my husband has not read all the Betsy Tacy books, but I read him that chapter, and he was crying at the end of it. It's just so beautifully done. And you just have this love for these people who are role models without being remotely obnoxious about it. A few years ago, I was with two Betsy Tacy friends. One is a high school librarian in Beverly, Massachusetts, and one is a physician. She's from Portland, Oregon. Her parents were immigrants from India, and they taught at St. Thomas here in the Twin Cities for a while. And they're both just delightful, fun people. And I was driving down Hennepin Avenue. We know all the places Maud Hart Lovelace lived, and we like to pay pilgrimage to them. And all of a sudden I saw Lakewood Cemetery, and I said, oh, we got to go in here. And why do we need to go in here? And I said, well, Bob and Julie Way are buried there, or Tom and Stella Hart, whichever you prefer. And they were both just, oh my gosh, we're going to there. Well, we got to the grave, and Barb walked over to Tom Hart's grave and laid down on top of it and said, I've always wanted to sit in his lap. And then Radhika, the physician, does the same thing. And I'm there. This is really Minnesotans don't do this. I could not lie down on that grave. I was not going to do that. It was a bit much. But I think there's something about these books. If you read them and fall in love with these people live their lives as you hope to live yours in a way that and they're not struggling. The Ingalls family, I'm not sure we can relate to them. The Rays, the Harts, were a middle-class family. And they moved into that high school house when Tom Hart became the county treasurer and wasn't just a shoe salesman anymore in his own shoe store. I'm sure he had other people. They had more money then, and eventually they moved to the Twin Cities. But they were more that most people could relate to, I think. The Ingalls family, I'm not so sure. We may identify them at some level, but not the way we identify with people who are more, their lifestyle is more like ours. And there were just, there were so many delightful characters, people you wish you'd known, so many wonderful stories. Like, Betsy loves Ivanhoe. She's read and reread it. For their 10th grade class assignment, so over the summer, the class is assigned to read Ivanhoe. Betsy, she loves it. She'll read it again. Sure, she'll be happy to. Well, school starts, and two local guys, Cab and Tony, that she both liked, they stopped by on the way to school, as they often did at her high school house. And they really never got around to reading Ivanhoe, and they wondered if she could give them the highlights of Ivanhoe. So she tells them the story of Ivanhoe on the way in. And then the next day they have to write an essay about Ivanhoe. Well, Cab and Tony ace that test, but Betsy does not do well at all because she goes into detail and she never makes it to the end of the book in describing the book. The teacher grades her down because it's clear she did not finish the book. And just things like this that make it, and this really happened. And so much of this is based on Maud Hart Lovelace's own life. It makes you want to love that family. It makes you want to meet that family, be with that family, know that family. And, it just is a terrible sadness that I wish I could have met her. And another thing I wish is, it's so obvious from the letters that I got from Maud Hart Lovelace, she would have loved to write to me for the rest of her life, and I didn't understand that. I was always afraid I was going to be bothering somebody, But I just love her so much, and I've met so many other people who love her the way I do. We have a listserv. I've been on it since 1985. I had tea in chambers at Oxford University because there's a Betsy Tacy fan there, and I was in Oxford. I have had experiences I could not imagine have happening because there are Betsy Tacy fans there. And almost all of us are really intelligent people who read a lot, have read a lot of books, and most of us would say the Betsy Tacy books are about as good as anything we've ever read in our lives. And yet people think, she's from Mankato, she's from Minnesota, how can this be a big deal? But it's happened before. It happened with Frankel's father. And for whatever reason, Walnut Grove got the star of being the television show, and nobody else got that particular little excitement.
Yeah. Well, I've had that sort of run with books. John Peck, I think, did 41 books. He's 80 something, and they're all it's kind of predictable what's going to happen, and it's all that same sort of small towny stuff. And you get into the world, and you just want to stay in that world and see see what the librarian did, see how the bullies turned out. But it is a little mysterious to me, this line to fandom. This line to loving an author from liking an author. It doesn't happen with every author. It doesn't even happen with every good author.
Yeah.
And I'm always a little puzzled as to, and sometimes when it happens cross-culturally, when there's a cult in Japan of somebody, or I get really puzzled as to what it is that is made, that makes that extra difference between recognizing this is really good stuff and naming your kids after the characters.
And that's happened, believe me. Yeah, that's happened. I don't know what it is, but Maud Hart Lovelace had it. And my friend John Coughlin, he has 3 PhDs. One is from the Sorbonne. He taught at Brown University. He's living in Minneapolis now, but he read it as an adult and was just stunned that she was such a good writer. And this is not non-intelligent, unread person. This is a brilliant person. One of the main books is Betsy and Tacy go over the big hill. He lived on top of the big hill, But he just assumed that because Maud Hart Lovelace was from Mankato, she couldn't have been that good of a writer. And then he started reading the books, and he was just blown away by how good they were. And I think it's very hard to articulate to somebody why these books just grabbed you. I can sit down. I own all the books in hardcover. I own every edition of the books that have been published in English, and I get excited when I read them again because it's just such a pleasure and such a joy. She is such a darn good writer. It's just, and that's so basic, but she pulls you along. You're in love with the characters. They're always singing around the piano, and it just drove me crazy. Some of the songs I knew, like I Wonder Who's Kissing Her Now. We even had the sheet music. But Howdy Sigh, Morningside, gosh darn Cyrus, but you're looking sly, where do you find that music? And it was a miracle when eBay came along and all of a sudden I could buy all of the music. I can sing every piece in this song. And I actually have worked in piano bars and been in the Minnesota Musicians Association. So this was like a dream come true that we were able to publish this book of the music, because they're always sitting around the piano, singing around the piano. Betsy's sister Julia is playing the piano. And, here's the Merry Widow, which is a song a lot of people still know. And it was so big. Everybody had Merry Widow hats and Merry Widow muffs and Merry Widow this and Merry Widow that. And it's just fun to find out about all of these things that, I don't know, it just has this whole culture attached to the books. And of course that time was ragtime era, the Gilded Age, it was just a beautiful, it was a very romantic, dramatic time in American history. And the books, Betsy's wedding, Joe goes off to fight in World War I, her husband, who was DeLoss Lovelace. When we met Carney, one of the main characters in the Betsy Tacy book, she told us, and I've read this other places, that Maud and her husband DeLoss Lovelace, every morning after they got up, they'd talk for a while, and they had to set a timer, because if they didn't set the timer, they would talk all day, and they just never ran out of things to say to each other, even though they've been married for decades, and you just think this is the kind of person we all would love to be, or to have a life that was so happy with the person that they ended up with. She romanticizes him. One of the letters that she wrote me said I glamorized Betsy and gave her all sorts of attributes I certainly did not possess. Well, that doesn't matter, but maybe that's part of the reason we have this glamorous creature who still had a gap between her teeth, which is described often in the book. But if you look at a picture of Maud Hart Lovelace smiling, it was not a gap. It was the size of a big tooth, of a big front tooth, and you just think, that wouldn't be so good to have. You just think how different things were. I don't know. There's just something about it that I just absolutely love those books, and I know other people who love them the way I do. And they're not all white people. A lot of people just love them because they're about human beings with very human failings and very human downsides and flaws, but they're people you fall in love with.
Well, you've got me sold. I'll be finding a copy. If there's one around the bookstore, I'll find one before I leave. Otherwise, within a couple of days, I got to find out what's grabbing you here. So maybe you'll have my application if to the society. I know families that sing like that, and they feel like they're from a different world.
Yeah. Our family did. I mean, we didn't really sing around the piano, but my dad was the church choir director. My mom was the church organist. And, my mom played the piano. I played the piano. We'd sing. I love music being a very big part of the life, and it's a very big part of the books. And I guess if I were to start reading the books right now, I might not start with the first one, especially I should ask John Coughlin to say which one you're used to. I might recommend that you try Betsy and Tacy, Betsy, it was originally Downtown, but now they've got it Betsy and Tacy Go Downtown, but Downtown was the original name. Betsy is now 12 years old. And her father's working downtown, and she's old enough now. She goes downtown with her father and goes to the new Carnegie Library downtown and expands her world with the books that are there and meets the librarian. And, every Saturday she gets to go downtown and go to the library, and she gets money to buy lunch and everything. And the new Carnegie Library is still there in Mankato. I was down in front of it in August with my friend from Beverly, Massachusetts. And while we were standing in front of it, just for old time's sake looking at it, it was Sunday morning, a car drove up. There were 2 young women in it. And they got out. Barb said they're Betsy Tacy fans. And I said, why do you think that? She said, they got cameras. They're Betsy Tacy fans. And they get out. Barb yells out, okay, which one of you is Betsy and which one is Tacy? And the one says, I'm Betsy. And the other one says, I'm Tib. And we all started laughing. And we're immediately friends. But, it's just been part of the wonder, too. It's just been the fact that we've been Betsy and Joe's first apartment. We heard it. We read. She described it so well. That's still there. It's still there. It's 2400 Aldrich Avenue South. It's a fourplex, and we've had conventions, and we write a letter to people, the current occupants, and say we'll pay $500 if you'll let people look at your apartment for 2 hours. You can be in the room. We don't care. We'll make sure nothing bad happens. And, of course, it's usually young people who are quite thrilled to get $500 for letting some people into their apartment for 2 hours. and we've also been in Betsy and Joe's Maud DeLass's first house, and we've been in lots of places where they actually lived, and that's been a lot of fun, So that really helps too. But you wouldn't believe the people from all over the USA and the world. We've got somebody in Germany that came to Mankato with her husband last year, and then up here so that we could all meet her. And it's just, we've got somebody in Australia that's come to conventions. It's really quite astonishing when you look at the whole big picture of it all. People who are teaching at Harvard, people, it's just incredible. You really want to meet us because you're going to learn a lot, and you're going to be delighting and delighted to get involved with the people who love these books.
Well, that's the striking thing about the story is it's a little bit like joining a club. You pick up the book, and pretty soon you have all these brothers and sisters across the world.
And we want more brothers and sisters. That's our goal. We're not going to do anything bad to you. We're just going to give you great joy. And I would say that very little in my life has given me more joy than reading the Betsy Tacy books. And heaven knows I've read Laura Ingalls Wilder books many, many times. And I love them dearly. But there's a remove. It's a little bit of a remove compared to the Betsy Tacy books. It's just a little bit different. And, Laura Ingalls Wilder is wonderful. And if you haven't read The Long Winter, have you read it?
I'm sure it's been read to me many times.
Okay, it's harrowing, it's like a horror story, what can happen when the cold gets really, really bad. But we know, we're from Minnesota, how bad it can get. But that's just, and out in the prairie, there's no question about it. But that, it is very, very cold. And of course, Laura Ingalls Wilder's pa actually got, stuck in the snow he made a cave out of snow and lived there for a few days to keep from freezing to death. And you just it's a much more primitive time. The Ray's family, Monhart Lovelace's family, was much more like we are today than, it was a whole leap forward as far as even in the books, they get the telephone, that brand new contraption. They don't have internet yet. We see the first automobile come to Mankato, and, you see all sorts of things and marvel at them, and it's pretty wonderful. So that's just one of my passions. You want to hear about some of the others?
Yeah, that was where I was going, is we have a little bit of time and you've got all these other interests.
Well, my
Go
other
ahead.
big passion is, well, I'm passionate about British history, and I love American history. God knows I love America, but I'm really Anglophile. But I'm mad for Broadway musicals, and I know I can sing you more Broadway musical scores from shows you never heard of than most people. I love Broadway musicals as much as I love the Betsy Tacy books. So that's another weirdo thing about me.
Yeah.
I haven't seen a show for a week or two. I saw Man of La Mancha right up the street here at Theater Latte Da at the Ritz. So, and enjoyed it.
Well, you're a great ad for being an educated person. Actually, I have a cult relationship to an historical writer.
You're what?
I have a cult relationship, one of those fan relationships.
Yeah.
To an historical writer. I don't know that she has made quite as big a splash, but Dorothy Donette does that for me.
Oh, really?
I have that. I have listened to the full audiobook of one of her very long things, and then started on tape 1 to listen to it again, and that never happens.
Yeah.
But so there, I kind of know the phenomenon. It happens to me with some other people. Sometimes with stuff, sometimes you can say, I love this, and it's good. But there's some stuff I'm very fond of that isn't good.
Yes.
And there's no way to make it good.
Yes.
But it does something. It does something visceral.
Yeah.
That much better books don't do.
Yeah.
And
that's a good way of putting it.
It's hard to say. What was some of John Grisham, oddly, hits me. The Pelican Brief. I can reread The Pelican Brief any day. And I think it's beautifully plotted and but it's a formula book. It's a genre book, okay? You can read all of his, you'll find the same sort of stuff. But it gets me, and I've been really curious sometimes why things. Why things will get one person and not another. That's a
really good question, isn't it? Why does this something grab you? And I know so many people these books have grabbed. It's just not like. It isn't like it's just a very few people. It's just, this is the second high school book, She's a sophomore in high school. Yeah. And she goes to Milwaukee for Christmas to visit her friend Tib, who's moved to Milwaukee. This really did happen to Maud Hart Lovelace, by the way. And in Milwaukee, on New Year's Eve, she's got a New Year's resolution. She's going to be dramatic and mysterious from now on. Wear only green... Only emeralds. Actually, she can't afford emeralds. She's gonna do all these things and sign her name Betsy, Betsye, at the end of it. This lasts about a few hours. She tries, but she keeps forgetting that she's supposed to be dramatic and mysterious. And it's kind of like the way we all frequently vow. We will not be the same person we always were. We're going to be something much more exciting. And of course, it doesn't work out because we are who we are usually. But this is a lovely book, and I'm not sure why I have it all marked up with bookmarks, but I don't know what I was thinking, what I was doing, something I was doing.
So, have any other infatuations come even close to this? Are there other authors that you've been engaged with in this way, or anything like this way?
Oh, there's many authors. I've read every book they've written, but I haven't reread it over and over, and I can't look at it with deep affection the way I look at these,
see.
You know what I mean? And want to, I have various Betsy Tacy items that are just, almost, they're just little things that people have made or given me, or Betsy graduated from high school in 1910, and I was out in Portland, Oregon, and we had a Betsy Tacy gathering at the home of the physician, And she had been, that day, I'd gotten them all tickets to go to the American Library Association Midwinter Conference exhibits. They could look at the exhibits for free. And most of them were not librarians. Well, Radhika the physician went around, and she'd just read a book called The Mother-Daughter Book Club by Heather Vogel Frederick. And it was about a group of girls who are in a mother-daughter book club. And there were 3 or 4 books in a series, and in one book they read, say Pride and Prejudice, and another they read a different one, and some of them were children's books, some of them were not children's books. Well, she saw this woman, and she just read this book, and she said, have you ever written a book about the Mother-Daughter Book Club and the Betsy Tacy books? And this woman had never heard of the Betsy Tacy books. Well, she lived in Portland, too, the woman did. And Radhika said, well, I'm having a dinner tomorrow night at my home, and it's going to be an Indian dinner, and I'm a pretty good cook. Would you consider coming for dinner? And the woman said, I'll think about it. Well, she came. And our goal was to make her write a book about the Betsy Tacy books. And when she left the party, she went home and read a Betsy Tacy books, read all the Betsy Tacy books, and wrote a book from the Mother-Daughter Book Club. And she's an absolutely delightful human being, and I drove her all over the Twin Cities and took her to Betsy places, and we went down to Mankato and went to the Betsy Tacy places together, and we just thought, we pulled it off. She's a popular writer, and that was good publicity for us to get, And we called it Making Winona Eyes. Another friend of Betsy's was Winona, and she would get complimentary tickets to all the shows because her father was the newspaper editor, and they knew she had tickets to a show, and they wanted her to take them because she got 4 comps. And they sat and tried to hypnotize her. But give us the tickets, and it worked. And, so we tried to hypnotize Heather into writing a book about Betsy Tacy and Tim. And now we all love her to death, and she loves the Betsy Tacy books. But we pulled it off. We hypnotized her. So you can see this is a bit of a passion. I may be over the top here.
Yeah, well, I mean, if it involved blowing up buildings, torturing animals, we'd have to worry, but it seems pretty harmless. Who knows what you'd happen on to if you didn't happen on to this. It also seems like the sort of thing that you, as a librarian, you really want to have happen to the kids in your library.
Yeah.
That they happen on to something that can accompany them through life and be a kind of comfort and support and informant and all that sort of stuff. Any ideas how to make that more likely, or is it just the grace of God and pure magic?
I think it's the grace of God and meeting the right book, and also just being willing to read. And I think my mom felt a lot about the Anna Green Gables books, as I felt about the Betsy Tacy book. And the unusual thing with the Anna Green Gables books was that we had my grandmother's copies of those, and from around 1900, or and we had those copies from that time, and I read virtually the entire series, which was out of print, which I didn't even realize at that time. But when I went to work in libraries, like in Queens, people wanted to read the next book, and you couldn't buy them in the USA. And I had Mom mail to me those books, and I would let people borrow my copies because their need was urgent, and I understood that need, and I always got them back. And when I went to work at Anoka County, I did the same thing. I'd let them borrow my copies, and I always got them back. But you're just thinking, these people felt sort of the same way, and I could only feel their pain and think, how lucky was I that I had all those books available to me. And then eventually we were able to get them. They came back into print in the USFA, probably when the TV series was on the first time, But that was a real crisis because people wanted those books so bad, and you just were, and mine were, real old by that time. So
So but there's our audience is going to split right down the middle between people who understand about absolutely needing the next book,
Yeah.
and people who can't imagine that.